Perhaps before we open this meeting, this is a small crowd, so we can each introduce ourselves, starting with Robert.
Bob McConnell.
And going this way.
Alex Kuzma.
Bjorn Arp.
Yuri Dobczynski.
Natalka Gojak.
Could you identify
Yes,
yourself?
start all over.
Your affiliation, yes.
Probably doesn't need introduction.
U.S-Ukraine Foundation.
Ukrainian Catholic Education Foundation.
Well, I'm an adjunct faculty at American University, and I'm a human rights lawyer, an international human rights lawyer.
I'm a librarian of Congress. Librarian of Congress.
Ukrainian specialist,
Thank you.
Slavic division expert.
not just any library.
Wow, I've got this club here.
I'm a retired editor in the law library, the Library of Congress.
Peter Vadinsky, retired Voice of America journalist and translator.
John Kuhn, U.S.-Ukraine Foundation. Hopefully someday I will be able to retire. Yes.
Forget about it.
Yeah, forget about it.
Alexandra Peterson, U.S.-Ukraine Foundation intern.
Alina Filipchuk, NYU Abu Dhabi student, U.S.-Ukraine Foundation intern.
I'm Bill Miller, retired ambassador to Ukraine.
Lada Pastashak, Amerikanсько-Українська ділова рада, U.S.-Ukraine Business Council, and Ukrainian Federation of America.
I'm Inchi Bowman, International Committee for Crimea.
I'm Igor Gavyak from Ukrainian American Coordinating Council. And thank you all for coming. I was going to introduce our speaker today, Mr. Marynovych, but this is wonderful because I don't need to have here a pretty detailed introduction so that I have been spared. But I do want to thank you very much for coming, and it is an honor for me to semi-introduce you to this group of people. And I must say that Nadia McConnell regrets that she couldn't be here with us and asked me to run this meeting, to be the coordinator. So without further ado, please, Mr. Marynovych.
Thank you. At the very beginning, I want to thank you for coming, and it is first. And then, sorry for my English. My brain is now very tired, so I will have some problems, so please forgive me. And now, I have good news and I have bad news, as always. But what is new in Ukraine is that we have good news also, because for a long time we had rather bad news, and many people couldn't bear that. So, the good news is that, as I told yesterday, it seems to me that the new generation was born in Ukraine. The new generation which cannot be labeled as Homo Sovieticus anymore. For me, this is the feast of my life, because I was so afraid when I saw that some features of old elite are permanently recreated in younger people. Oh, come on, how long, when finally we will have different population? It seems to be that now it was born. It was visible, especially during the first days of Maidan, when it was Euromaidan, when it was young Maidan, when only young people were in Kiev, in Lviv. At that time, I was in Lviv mostly. These young people invited me every day to have some talk to them. I saw their eyes, I heard their voice. And what shocked me completely, that they started to speak about values, They wanted European values. They didn't want corruption. They wanted dignity, their dignity to be respected. And they were sometimes even aggressively defendant before the intervention of ideology. For example, in Lviv, there is a famous politician, Yuri Mikhailchyshin. He belongs to Svoboda party. He is very aggressively nationalistic, and ideology is just the other name of him. But and these young people protested against his attempt to transform this dancing Maidan into serious Maidan. We politicians are able to be serious, but it was it was fantastic and very, of course, sometimes naive. We understand that young people are naive in many questions, but at the same time, the purity, yes, is it correct word, of the emotions was just fantastic. Later, politicians succeeded to put them aside, unfortunately, but it was natural. Somebody had to pay money for organizing Maidan, for feeding people. So young people couldn't do that. So with money, some other forces came to Maidan. But at the same time, probably you remember that during Maidan there was always criticism of the Maidan toward politicians, toward leaders of political parties, even oppositional parties. I don't say about Yanukovych. So again, it was a clear sign that people do not trust ideologies, do not trust political leadership. Unfortunately, Maidan didn't find substitution for corrupted political leaders. And at the decisive moment, immediately after the moment when Yanukovych fled the country, then it was Parliament who received a decisive voice in society. But there are no young people in the Parliament. Old ideological forces, parties, including communists, including Party of Regions. So it was really difficult for these young people to have some attention of the society. The society didn't hear their voice. There is few organizations, including political parties. I mean, Democratic Alliance. Very nice young people. I had a meeting with them during the Maidan in Kyiv-Mohyla Academy. Again, it was Roskish,
delightful
luxury. I was just delighted to speak, to talk to them, and then receive their reactions. It was fantastic. Now I see their activity, and But I forgot to give you one symbol of this new generation. This is generation with a very strong feeling of dignity. And maybe you saw the photo, and maybe you know the fact that during the visit of Joe Biden, yes, I'm correct, he wanted to see the city. And Hanna Hopko, a young journalist, escorted him during this city tour. And I saw some photographs. Again, I was delighted because I remember how would behave young people at my time when we were Homo Sovieticus. Vice President of the United States. That would be the reaction of people. What can I say? And so on, so on. Young lady, brave. She was going with Biden in this way.
That's a little dangerous with Biden.
Speaking nice English, good English with him. And dignity. If you look at this photo, dignity. And again, for me, this is a very important moment. But not only dignity, it's an ability to be very active in lobbying the necessary transformation of the society. She is part of the so-called rehabilitation platform for reforms. It sounds rather strange even for Ukrainians, but they decided to label themselves in this way. And I heard their story about this lobbying. Again, this phenomena was not present in Ukraine a few years ago, before Maidan. It's quite new phenomena. It's Western technique, Western understanding of how they should have to behave. And I didn't see any any weaknesses in the sense of possible corruption. They are proud that they are not corrupted. It's visible that they are proud of that. So again, this is very important. Second good news, the incredible level of consolidation of Ukraine. Of course, so far I give you positive picture. Because in every place I may find something critical, something non-idealistic, but I would like to present you something that is very positive for me. Recently, a few days ago, here in the United States, I read the article of one woman who is originally from Dnipropetrovsk. And she says, I cannot understand what is going on with my city. And she gives pictures, different pictures. Blue and yellow, on dresses, on buildings. And she said, this is very natural. This is very, nobody pushes people to do that. It's their natural reaction. They want to show everywhere that they belong to this country. It was not possible half a year ago, before Maidan, Dnipropetrovsk, it's pro-Russian city with very critical attitude toward everything national. Now the explosion of this national feeling. Odessa, the same situation. I saw a video clip, enormous marches in favor of Ukraine with anti-Putin slogans. And funny that all these former nationalistic slogans like Slava Ukraini, Героям слава, it sounds in Russian, Slava Ukraini, Героям слава. So I really cannot recognize former south of Ukraine, which was, and there is a conclusion now in our press that there is no such a notion as southeast of Ukraine. It splitted into different spots, into different reactions, but Odessa and Dnipropetrovsk like two symbols of this transformation. This gives the strong potential for the third good news, consolidation of the country around a newly elected president. I voted for him, and I was dreaming that we vote in one turn, in one round. I was just praying about that because Russia questioned everything, including our ability to be a nation, our ability to be a consolidated nation. Divided the country is divided. It's just divided. Then the results of the elections broken up almost all Russian all Russian points of criticism. First of all, this nation is able to be consolidated. So Putin was just beaten by that unanimous, almost unanimous, but it was not 99% in favor of Poroshenko. If it would be so, nobody in the West would trust the results. But it's 55, so it's more than, it's quite enough for one round. But it was clearly that this was free elections, and we all saw that the nation which is not traumatized by the power vote in a natural, vote democratically in a natural way. So people are very happy. People in Lviv, many people were in embroidered shirts. Many, nobody told us, but it was a feast for us. We decided to show that we are together. Then the fact that two nationalistic parties received altogether, yes, about 2%. Well, what about fascist and nationalist and Banderovci and so on.
They were all voting in the elections in Western Europe.
They migrated. Good one, David. Good one.
And but for Putin, it was the end of his story. And maybe you know that the first information in the Russian TV about Ukrainian elections was that Yarosh, the third sector, received about 80% of votes. Absolutely crazy, just to show that Ukraine is a fascist country for for its citizens. Of course, later they changed that. But the first message for the Russian people was the right sector won.
What did they eventually modify that to? What's the number they finally? When initially they said 80%, but afterwards they retracted that. What did they? What was the second variety
explanation?
Of the line? Yeah.
Well, I don't know.
I don't think they have one.
That's right.
Then the Russian point was that Ukraine is anti-Semitic, but Rabinovich, with a clear family name, it's understandable that he is a Jew. Rabinovich received more votes than a nationalistic party altogether. So again, it was ruined. Ukraine is anti-Semitic. So it was great. Now, let's turn to bad news. Of course, we have many challenges and many threats, yes. First of all, about our internal situation. The main thing is inertia. Inertia of old Ukraine, so to say. First of all, elite. I looked at our parliamentarian elite, about some other elite in the regions. It's visible that they are sure that they may repeat the same phenomena as it was after the Orange Revolution. Okay, yes, you played, you danced, you revolted, but we know who has the power and we will manage that. Few of them are ready to repent. Few of them. They just want to jump from one horse to the other. Suddenly, I heard that Volodymyr Litvin, the former head of our parliament, who is somehow connected to the Benghazi case, and who is actually, all people are tired of him. So he appeared again, and there were rumors that he wants to become a head of the parliament again. So they propose themselves as professionals. They propose themselves for the new roles. Of course, this is exclusively dangerous. But what we have to find, it's rather difficult. We have to find a golden mean between two extremes. The first one is to repeat the mistake after the Orange Revolution. The other extreme is to eliminate everyone, to all of them. We really sometimes need professionalism. We need somebody who is able to speak with different categories of the population. For me, Poroshenko is a good president because he knows the language of different categories of people. If I put myself, for example, at the post of president, yes, I would be very good in speaking with people with civil society. But I don't know how to speak with oligarchs because I don't know their language, and so on and so on. So we have to trust somebody in our elite, at least to make some step further. But at least with Poroshenko, I had a chance to tell him straight ahead, personally. It was he came to the Ukrainian Catholic University the last week before elections. He was in Lviv and he visited our university. He was part of one book presentation, so it was not official public lecture by him, but he was present. Of course, he took the floor, but then after him, I took the floor and told him that, look, the decision you have to take is even more important and more difficult than the decision we will have to take on Sunday. Because you have a choice. One option is that you become a president, a transitional president, with doing something good, something wrong, standing and hesitating, being afraid of doing something which is may be criticized. Yes, maybe it would be not so bad as Yanukovych, but there is clearly another option, and this option is that you become a great president, that you consolidate the nation around yourself and go and reform the country. You will become then the first president of Ukraine, of new Ukraine. So at least I told them that to him. And he listened rather attentively. But this inertia is dangerous, especially dangerous in the sense of corruption. I was told that in Kyiv, Myroslav told me that, again, he received the information that in some university in Kyiv, before exams started, староста, як то сказати, the student who is organizing the group,
like the student council president.
Mm-hmm. So it was a lady. She announced that, okay, who wants to pass the exam, please give money and I will collect the money. So, again corruption. The same in Lviv and Medical University. I was told that one professor, which is well known as an extreme corrupted professor, didn't change at all. So this is the challenge we have to meet and we have to solve. We organized at the Ukrainian Catholic University, and I was present later at different meeting. So we tried to unite student bodies in different universities and to convince them that they have to fight because just give up means the return to the previous situation. Of course, it would be difficult because corruption is the disease which is dependent on different factors, juridical. Our parliament has to block all these juridical
Loopholes.
holes, so to say, that produce, that enhance corruption. Our churches, I appeal to our churches, please do something all together, because we have to appeal to people not to accept corruption as a norm. That the power, that the administration, the government is against us. So we cannot survive without that. This is a typical logic. They are against us, we will be against them, we will distribute funds in our interest. Then, outside dangers and challenges. Russia to be the first, of course. But it seems to me that the Russia Hawk is much less dangerous for Ukraine than Russia dove. Russian dove. It was when we have aggressive Russia, then the whole world has nothing except for supporting Ukraine, because it's impossible to support an aggressor in 21st century. But as soon as Russia, as Putin came to Normandy and played the role of a man who wants to bring peace to Ukraine, then Europe immediately changed its rhetoric. Then, after Normandy, 2 days later, the French minister reacted on some phrases used by Poroshenko in his inaugurational speech. And this French minister told, Poroshenko told that he wants to join, that Ukraine wants to join the EU, wants to sign association. But I have to say that Europe is not ready to accept Ukraine. And it would be better for Ukraine not to think about joining EU, but to make peace in its relations with Russia. So, is it Ukraine who invaded Russia? I was just furious. Because, again, pro-Putin, pro-Russian, they do not see anything except for Russia. And the role of Putin as a peacekeeper immediately gave an opportunity for Europe to push, to make pressure on Ukraine to accept Russians' arguments and to close the issue of Ukraine, to close the whole problem of Ukraine. So it seems to me that the same Ukraine fatigue is forming in the world, in Europe definitely, I don't know here in the United States, but a little bit different, not because Ukraine is so corrupted no, the world understands that there is a chance for Ukraine now, but the world wants to think about something else, not about Ukraine and Russia. So this is a clear danger for us, because then probably only the new Europe, I mean countries which were former communist countries, will understand the nature of Putin's regime and will support Ukraine to some extent, but not France, not Germany, not the Netherlands, and so on. There is a danger in Europe, the danger for Ukraine in Europe, that this notion of de-escalation. Okay, we also want the escalation of the situation in Ukraine. But I'm afraid that it will be some kind of bargain that Putin will propose for Ukraine, and Europe will be pressing on Ukraine to accept that. What I mean, of course, the main goal of Russia is to block the movement of Ukraine toward Europe. This is the main goal. The best solution would be that Ukraine goes to the restored Soviet Union. It's the program maximum, so to say. But if it is not possible, what is needed now is not to allow Ukraine move to the EU. And that's why all these military conflicts on the eastern part, they are not stopped. Today, tanks were invaded into Ukraine. And as far as I heard, there was no clear reaction, even in the United States, against that. Of course, Iraq, other issues are now more important than this one. Putin is willing to make peace in Ukraine. Then gas negotiations. Probably Putin will meet with Poroshenko soon, and they will discuss that issue. What is how to say, що є на торгівлі?
What's up for negotiation?
Yeah, what is
market?
First of all, if you don't pay your debt, if you cannot pay, then give all your system, transportation system for gas supply. If you don't want to do that or cannot do that, then agree with the annexation of Crimea. Then agree, and then all, for example, airplanes may international communication may go to Simferopol and all other. Then there will be no ban for relations with Crimea, because Ukraine accepted that annexation. So again, you may imagine how what threats are behind the good rhetoric of the world that we will never accept that, and so on. Okay, so my time is 20 minutes is over, but of course I would readily answer your question. Sorry, I started to.
Ambassador Miller, please.
You present a very clear picture of the good and the bad. In the next 3 or 4 months, before the parliamentary elections, will be the time of testing of not only Ukraine, but the will of the rest of the world. And in this respect, it seems to me that Poroshenko hasn't yet put together the people who will speak at the UN, come to Congress, the other parliaments of Europe, and make the case for the invasion of Crimea and the territorial integrity of Ukraine, and the need for help from the rest of the world through this period of crisis. Unless you make the case in the forums that exist in New York, in Washington, in London, Paris, Berlin, you will have lost the battle, it seems to me. The resolve of the United States has been shown to be wanting. We didn't honor our agreements. And we're unwilling to go to war in defense of Ukraine. So Ukraine has to make the case as powerfully as it can in the forms that exist. It hasn't done so. And this is a necessity. Perhaps Poroshenko has to go himself, but he has to choose a foreign minister of strength and a spokesman for the interests of Ukraine before the other governments of Europe and the world. It's a dangerous situation. For example, the question of assistance, military assistance to Ukraine. Ukraine's military and intelligence was stripped out by Yanukovych in working together with Putin. The military aspect has to be strengthened in an effective way, which doesn't mean that Ukraine is going to invade Russia. Yeah. It's going to defend itself, and that's legitimate. But that case has to be made in New York, at the UN, in the halls of Congress, in the Parliament of London, and in the Assemblée Nationale in Paris, and throughout the parliaments of the world. You're not doing it. And that's the agenda that you have to pursue, it seems to me. A second point is Maidan. I know from my conversations with their leaders, is looking on this period as a period of testing, whether it will be the old system or a new possibility. They have not been included in the political process yet. Are they going to have a place at the table in the government? Will there be representation from Maidan in the government? Has this been an issue of insistence by the political leaders of the country who wish a favorable result. Without Maidan, you're going to have a collapse of the political system down the road.
Thank you. Yes, I totally agree with your first point. I don't know the reason why, so I'm not an advisor of Poroshenko. I don't know why it is not done. I don't think that it was not done because it was not, they are not willing to do that. You know, it seems to me that there is one mistake when we list what is not done by Ukraine. This list is non-exhaustive because we didn't do many things. But it seems to me that we just underestimate the trauma all the nation suffered during all this period. We didn't recover from one period, then we have another, Holodomor, war, and so on, persecutions, and now the period of Yanukovych, which was very devastating. Then Maidan, psychologically very difficult for the whole nation. I remember that feeling. I was just exhausted. Then the few days of our glory, of our joy that Maidan was successful, and then Crimea and invasion, Russian aggression. If anybody, if some people have a car accident, then all the doctors and all people understand that they have to put into hospital and have some
recuperation.
Yes, recuperation. Yeah. Yes. It is very clear, but the nation passed so big challenges, and we expect that its elite, which was corrupted by Russia, which was corrupted by many governments, including Europe. By the way, Europe also paid money to our officials. We don't have army, we don't have SBU, everything we have we have to rebuild. So we need probably time, and what else? We need support, we need assistance. I understand that the United States didn't want to take military actions even in spite of the Budapest 1994 agreement. Well, okay, I understand that, because we didn't want the Third World War to be to happen as well. But there are many different ways to support Ukraine. And for example, if there is a sense, or there is an understanding that Ukraine doesn't do something, please send advisors to Yatsenyuk, to Poroshenko, with the whole list. What you have to find people for that. Support us with money, because our treasury is unfortunately empty. Was at least empty after Yanukovych fled, at least. Now I suggest. So it seems to me that there are many fields that the West may assist Ukraine, helping to rebuild itself as soon as possible. I don't know, maybe to mention that Marshall Plan again, to organize something like that. Okay. So.
Natalie and then Ambassador Courtney.
I was wondering, you talked about the elite, and it seems the children of the elite, or a lot of them, go to Mohilanska Institute. And tam je, corruption, dosyć багато, so the children get in. And your university has done such a wonderful job and has wonderful students. Is there any pan-student organization, or is there any way that Catholic University could have a moral influence on other universities, especially in Mohyl?
Yes, it was almost the first thing which was done by the university immediately after the end of Maidan. By the way, local businessmen in Lviv took initiative. So they came to us and invited the leadership of the university for discussion one important issue. Okay, Maidan was successful. We have to change our officials in our region. With whom?
Yeah. The Makadriu, yeah.
You are flexible university. You have to start the program of re-education immediately. Not re-education, actually, the education of young people who are able already to serve as officials. It was fantastic proposal because they do not only express idea, they pay money for that. And they started, it gave the first tranche, so to say, for that program. We started almost immediately, inviting people from the West, inviting people, powerful managers from Ukraine. I gave one lecture to those people about religion and human rights. How to sense religious rights, human rights in the religious field. Administration, from the point of view of official, how to deal with human rights, religious human rights. And again, I was fascinated how many young, good professionals we have. Professionals in the sense that they want to have knowledge. They do not just listening and wanting to have the document of no, they really want to know. So this is what we organize, the good governance program. It is very popular now in Ukraine. People even from Kharkiv come to join this this program. So this is what we can do in the Ukrainian Catholic University.
Ambassador Courtney.
Yes, thank you. Let me offer good news and not so good news. On the good news side, before the Maidan crisis, most NATO elites in America and Europe believed that the edge of NATO was a cliff, and beyond that, not to be protected. The Maidan crisis has changed all that. It's now clear that NATO at the edge is a glide slope, and that Ukraine is an important priority. It's hard to imagine the NATO Secretary General talks about Ukraine almost as if it's a NATO member, even though it's not, in terms of importance. President Obama has been in the Rose Garden more times on this issue than any other issue since healthcare reform. That's really good news. The not so good news is economic reform. Economic reform. In the West, most people believe that Ukraine's biggest failing for 22 years was not making economic reforms. Ukraine is poor. It's not because of Russia, it's because Ukraine did not make economic reforms. Poroshenko, in his acceptance speech, did not endorse the IMF reforms. The IMF reforms are only a beginning of both liberalization of the economy that needs to take place, as well as austerity measures such as cutting subsidies. From the Western standpoint, 3-5 years from now, probably the single most important thing for Ukraine to do is to reform its economy and become more prosperous. Otherwise, people will believe that Ukraine is still a failure. And that doesn't come through. It didn't come through in Poroshenko's speech. Poroshenko needs to surround himself with PhDs in economics from Western universities, and Ukraine has them, really top people, and Poroshenko has to take ownership of economic reform and make it his quest. It's almost like he needs a guide. That's really important to build confidence in the West.
It's interesting that I read several opinions in Ukraine from very smart people that they said that it's very nice, it's very good that Poroshenko didn't mention economic issues in his speech. I cannot explain that. It was strange for me, and I memorized that. I don't know, maybe for Western readers, it would be better that he mentioned. Maybe, for example, for me, I would say for the nation, look, we need to do reforms, and reforms will inevitably diminish for some time the level of your income. Be ready for that. It's not because I will manage the country badly, but because we need to pass that period of time. So, but I just give you that opinion that for some reason, maybe I travel too much, I don't understand what is going on. But I totally agree with you about the importance of economic reform. And I know that at least when I spoke with different diplomats and people in the West, I asked desperately not to give money just to support, but give money for certain preconditions. And it seems to me that it is very clearly understandable now, and yet Yatsenyuk will not receive money just for pleasure. Economic reforms is sine qua non for Ukraine. For many people I spoke before. I cannot say now why it is not announced immediately. Maybe it is being done already, some steps. And we have, for example, as a minister, we have Pavlo Sheremeta. Is Western-trained economic expert. And as far as I remember, I read several articles. He has an excellent, as it was said, excellent program of transformation of Ukrainian economy, of Ukrainian economic system in general. So I'm optimistic in that sense. It was not the case after the Orange Revolution. Nobody spoke about economical reforms. Now it is almost as clear as the necessity of decentralization of the country. That this old Soviet management of the country is just disaster for us. We have to raise the responsibility of local people for themselves and for the country.
Mr. Fedynsky?
Yes. When you look at Western Europe, it seems to me that they face a choice. They have their short-term material interests, business interests, and Russia for Western Europe is a market and a source of energy. On the other hand, Ukraine would be competition for agriculture, for aviation, for Western Europe. That's one thing. Now, Western wealth is built on values, which are represented by Ukraine, values of justice, of tolerance, of patience, and that's what Ukraine wants. So Western Europe faces a choice between its material and its ideal values. Now, to what extent can the Vatican help provide moral suasion to convince the capitals that Ambassador Miller was talking about, the capitals of Western Europe, Berlin, Paris, etc., to do the right thing and to support the moral values that underpin Western European prosperity? And is Patriarch Sviatoslav contacting the Vatican and Pope Francis in that regard?
The issue of values versus safety is very painful for me. Yes, I remember the time 1989. The rhetoric of Europe, the rhetoric of the whole world was values. Finally, we will rebuild that Western civilization, European civilization, together with Eastern countries, and so on. Now, the rhetoric is safety, not values. It is suddenly, surprisingly, Ukraine which is speaking the language of values. Not Angela Merkel, not French ministers and president, and so on. Not definitely in London, which is rich because of Russian money coming to London. There is an understanding of Ukrainian crisis. I don't like that expression because it presupposes that it is the Ukrainian guilt of that, but Russian guilt is very big. But the Ukrainian crisis is an internal crisis in the space which is controlled by Russia. We don't need to be there. It is very, very common spread understanding. Why should we pay with our prosperity, with our money, with our safety for some people who cannot manage themselves? And we have nothing to say. Yes, so far Ukraine, as there is a joke, Ukraine never lose its chance to lose its chances. So far, yes, we were losing our chances. But it doesn't mean, but when you think strategically, not just, well, my money, my business, and so on. So my point is that Europe became korotkозора.
Short-sighted.
So you understand that. It doesn't think strategically and morally and ethically. And that's the point, that values are not the most important things. And in that sense, Europe reminds me the ancient Rome, which was surrounded with fortress, and didn't want to speak the language of values, and barbarians spoke about values and invaded. My pretension, my blame, my dissatisfaction with Europe is that I don't see Adenauer, Schumann, those leaders who were able to combine very practical politics, very practical. They were not dreamers, but very practical politicians with values.
Now, can the Vatican and Pope Francis help?
I can say little about that. I may repeat the common impression of many Ukrainians that they expected more. They expected more clear position of the Pope in Ukrainian crisis. I don't want, so I don't know. I don't know the inner reasons for that. But I remember my feeling also that I expected that, well, when Pope will clearly speak about aggression of Russia and supporting Ukraine. It was not done so clearly.
Yeah, thank you. If you allow maybe a comment to this last question, from my perspective as a European, I have to say that Ukraine, or the Ukrainian crisis, really came up at a very bad moment of the historic times in which we are, because the European Union right now is in a very profound crisis, an institutional crisis, a value crisis if you also want, certainly an economic crisis. And the European Union currently is not able to resolve and to cope with its own problems internally. And the situation in Ukraine has really come at a very, very, very bad moment from the European perspective. And that's very sad. Just a comment, maybe to clarify a little bit. You're wondering why Europe is not doing more. I perfectly understand it. It's overwhelming, the European institutions. Totally. Because there's a crisis. Many people even are doubtful whether the European Union as a project in itself really has a long-standing future for the next 50 years or so. And so in these circumstances, it's difficult for the Europeans to really have a strong stance in Ukraine. In this context, maybe, again, to call it in some way, this hot potato of Ukraine passes over again to the Americans. And I leave it for the Americans to comment on what their stance is in that. But certainly the European position, from my point of view, is very clear, and I think we just have to open the newspaper and see what's going on in Europe to understand totally what's going on there. I have another question, a more precise question in regard to Crimea. Can you develop a little bit on what is really going on in Crimea right now? What happens with the population in Crimea? Who is still there, or who is there right now? Have many Ukrainians actually fled Crimea?
Yes.
In those that stay in Crimea, what are they actually doing to try to somehow maybe oppose the presence of the Russians there, to organize themselves, to bring out also their own voice? I'm very interested in knowing more about all this development.
Okay, but first of all, thank you for reminding me about that issue of the Ukrainian crisis and Europe. I started to talk about that, but I didn't finish my thought. That Europe accepts that as an internal conflict within something different, but it is very international crisis because Russia subverts the whole system of international relations. And Europe doesn't want to take that seriously. That's the point, that that Europe wants to safeguard something material, gas supply for winter and so on. But it leaves something more valuable for when someday later, not now. And that is the mistake which was done before the Second World War.
It was also done with Yugoslavia in very similar terms.
Yeah.
Could I add to that? That you're right that Russia is using that, and nobody knows the European crisis like Putin, because Putin is supporting the right-wing parties, which are opposed to the European Union. When you look at the observers that were in Crimea, they were all right-wing parties, so that the right wing opposes the EU and Putin supports the right wing of Europe. So the values are important, and if Europe wants to avoid the right wing, it must support Ukraine.
Okay, thank you. We don't have a great deal of time, and we need to have other people who would like to ask questions.
But no, I didn't answer the question about Crimea.
Crimea, yeah.
Yes. Of course, I'm not a specialist on that part of Ukraine, so that's why I don't know everything. But I'll tell what I know. First of all, I make a call to my friend, Crimea Tatar, who didn't fled Crimea, who stayed there. He is an owner of a pension close to the seashore. I asked him how he survives. And he said very sadly that nobody lives in his pension. Pensionat, I don't know.
It's like a little hotel, like a not a halfway house.
I'm sorry, I used
almost like a boarding house.
I used the wrong word. So nobody comes and lives there. And in order to survive, he has to
raise livestock. Raise livestock.
Because otherwise he cannot survive.
Just to clarify that, so in pension, like a sort of a tourist center that he would attract tourists to come there, almost like a bed and breakfast, and now nobody's. It's a resort or mini resort, but now there's no more tourism really coming there.
Before the crisis, 70% of people who came regularly to Crimea in the summer were Ukrainians from Ukraine. Now, of course, nobody goes there. But Russians are not too fast in going to Crimea as well. Transportation to Crimea is rather difficult. So this is a problem financial for the people. Also, I don't know about Ukrainian ethnic population in Crimea. Probably they adapt themselves for different situations. They were not so strong in a sense of social, civil society. They didn't have strong organizations which supported their position. Crimea Tatars, many of them left Crimea, some of them stayed there. Many Crimea Tatars are now in Lviv Oblast in western Ukraine. And there are different programs to how to help them in a practical sense. And what is interesting in the sense of psychology. I saw the commencement day for some school in Yalta. It was a clip on the internet. They stood, and the Russian hymn, the Russian anthem, starting to play. And then after several minutes, a group of young children start to sing Ukrainian anthem. So it was very interesting. Russian music and Ukrainian anthem. Yalta again. It was impossible before the crisis. It was just impossible that in Crimea there are people who are so courageously in favor of Ukraine. So this shows that there are inner potential of protest in Crimea against Russian rule.
May I just add the figure we have is about 15,000 Crimean Tatars left Crimea out of 300,000. So it's still a very small percentage. You know, it's I don't have that kind of figure for Ukrainians though. How many of them left? So they're resisting, of course. Resisting. And they're organized, better organized than the Ukrainians. For tourism, that's what I understand is that what I read, the government, a local government told these private owners of small bed and breakfast type places, they cannot rent their places. They have to fill the hotels first. So that's really tough. 60% of Crimean Tatars depend on tourism in Crimea, so they're in difficult position. Your friend was is a Crimean Tatar? Or okay. Yeah. Okay, and also lack of water, that's affecting agriculture. Ukraine cut down. You reduce the amount of load. Crimea depends for its water, electricity, and gas on Ukraine. The water, especially, there is this canal that was built during the Soviet times that was bringing water to Ukraine. They reduced that, so the farms in the northern part of Ukraine, that's close to where the canal and the water goes down to Kerch. And so those farms are really suffering apparently. And apparently both Ukrainians and Crimean Tatars.
But the problem is that Russia doesn't want to pay for that water. That's very simple.
That's right, they owed money or something like that. So now I understand that some of the small farmers, Crimean Tatars, I represent Crimean Tatars, so I say Crimea, but I don't know that much about the situation of Ukrainians in Crimea. I understand that many of the small growers own their own artesian wells, so they may not be affected, but certainly many people, farmers, will be affected this summer. So tourism, lack of water.
About the Crimean Tatars, they don't have much political participation in Crimea right now, I guess.
No.
Or is
Jimmy
there some
Lev
dialogue
just
going
gave an interview to Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, saying that the Majlis will probably be closed down. They had sent two representatives to work with the new occupying powers, but they were dismissed last week or 2 weeks ago, so they may be outlawed soon. Yes.
terrible.
I'm wondering how much discussion, how much this enters into the negotiations for the gas and the oil. And that is the fact that Russia has taken over an entire peninsula, has taken over the assets of the Ukrainian army, the assets of the navy, and they're demanding money for gas. It's like, wait a minute, you guys broke into our shop and you're demanding that we pay. In other words, how much of that is talked about in these negotiations? You don't see that argument, you don't see that issue being brought up in the media. People somehow avoid that. The fact that they've busted into this, country, and yet they're demanding payment for gas.
And
It just doesn't make
moreover,
sense.
just 2 days ago, they said they
The
were going
mafia.
to take,
It's the mafia style.
get a court order to take the property of the Ukrainian owners.
Right, right.
There is also that.
This kind of goes back to the issue that Ambassador Miller raised earlier about Ukraine making its case.
Yes.
Because we have not, and the diaspora also has to take responsibility for making that case as much as possible. We've also, if Ukraine has gone through a little bit of Ukraine fatigue of its own and lack of time for rehabilitation, I think the diaspora also, even though there's a lot of activity, but in terms of focusing the message that needs to go to the media and to public officials, it's really a challenge. And I think, one of the issues that we always at UKU and the foundation and the kind of things that Peter Fedinsky was asking about, how much can we influence as a little university, influence the Pope or influence public policy, whatever. We don't mean to overstate that, and sometimes we don't want to raise expectations, but the fact is that there is a pretty direct line of communication between Vladika Boris and Poroshenko and Patriarch Sviatoslav, and I think that's an important challenge for us as a small university to take on. What channels of communication and access we have, we certainly are going to try to use as well as possible. And I think that's a really good point, that Poroshenko right now, because he's never run a country, he may run a successful business, he really needs some guidance and to understand that there are certain things that won't cost him much money. It'll be a plane ticket for a really competent person to come to New York and Washington and to spend some time here agitating as powerfully as possible. But UKU has always had this sense of urgency about it. In fact, the Good Governance Program, I think, is a case in point, where literally these business leaders came in, asked UKU to implement this. Sofia Patsku, the head of the business school, jumped into action like within a week. She was already in Pittsburgh, at the Kennedy School at Harvard, at Wharton, at Yale, at the School of Management, and meeting very intensively with people. So we try to follow up on that sort of sense of urgency. The best thing I thought Poroshenko said in his inauguration, or maybe shortly thereafter, was that I don't have 100 days, I have 10 days to move. Well, he's got to move, and I think making that case is really important. And the last point, though, is that just getting back to the business people that approached the school and asked for this good governance program, it indicates that there are sumlindi, conscientious business leaders that want a new kind of economy and a new non-corrupt and incorruptible economy. The problem is that a lot of them are not well known. The oligarchs are well known, but there are small to mid-sized businesses that have prospered in spite of brutal reprisals from Yanukovych and his thugs. And those are businesses that really need to be supported and given resources. We have not, from the point of view of the U.S. government or USAID and other agencies, we were pretty sloppy in the way that a lot of aid from the U.S. went to Ukraine in the early stages. And I think we've got to look at the businesses that are capable of making a quick transition, of leveraging new aid, maybe developing a new product line, maybe gaining access to Western markets. And we need to tout those success stories because, as Myroslav said, the Ukrainian people know that they're going to suffer in the short run and they're going to have to make economic sacrifices. I think more than Greece or Spain or the other EU countries that have been problem children for the EU, Ukraine, I think, has shown a lot of political maturity in the last months. But we need to show both the Ukrainian people and the West that there are viable businesses, that the Ukrainians are ready to roll up their sleeves and accomplish something significant. And those are the businesses that were typically punished under Yanukovych. They now need to be rewarded for the level of
Yeah.
initiative and dynamism that they've shown, even if it's a matter of just better marketing to the West. And there are some people that are working on that right now, with people like Natalie Oresko and other folks that are trying to bring good quality investments into Ukraine. And so we're also very grateful to the U.S.-Ukraine Business Council and the U.S.-Ukraine Foundation for this opportunity to share some of these ideas and really brainstorm. But we also have a big responsibility to jump on this wagon and figure out how we're going to infuse the best kind of aid and the best targeted aid possible.
Yeah, I have a question for you, Mr. Marynovych. Lately, analysts in the United States and in Western Europe, and just recently, a friend of ours had an article in a Ukrainian newspaper where he raised the possibility of a solution to the crisis in Ukraine, for Ukraine to become another Finland. You know, Finland has always been between Russia and the Western world. And he points out, other analysts also point out that Finland has survived, it's prospered, it's doing well. Well, perhaps this is the solution for Ukraine today. This is not my thinking, I'm just bringing this up because I would like to hear your comments about it.
Yes, I heard about that discussion. It seems to me that I cannot reject the whole idea of Ukraine having some special status between different worlds, so to say. But there is one very important difference between Finland and Ukraine. Finland, it was very easy for Russia to let Finland go. Of course, the shame of losing the battle, it was present. But Finland was not so important for Russia as Ukraine is. Why? Not because Ukrainians are special, but because Kyiv is in Ukraine. And Kyiv is the center of legitimization of the whole Russian ideology, state ideology. Russia misuses the word Ruski that was present in our old books. There was a phrase, Kyiv мать городов руських. Ruskich means the space around Kyiv. And Russia says, Kyiv мать городов русских, Russian. And having in mind Russians. Why Ukraine owns Kyiv? Kyiv is ours, Russians. That's why this is the construction, ideological construction, which was built under Peter I and Catherine II.
Thank you. Not calling her Catherine the Great.
Peter wasn't so great either.
Because Crimean Tatars don't refer to her as Catherine the Great.
But this ideological construction is very, Russians are sensitive to that. If they lose Kyiv, they lose the legitimization, historical legitimization. That's why the Finnish example probably would not work.
Plus, Finns are not Slavs, and whether we like it or not, Russians do have a certain, from their point of view, feeling, to Ukrainians. They're a little bit like us. And Finns, of course, are not like that. Are there any more questions? We have tired our guest.
Well, we have many questions, but I think it's time to go. He's very tired.
One comment. Next week, on the 19th, there's an opportunity when a number of high officials from Ukraine are coming to Washington for a conference on the state of Ukraine, a report that is an opportunity for making the case on the part of Ukrainian officials.
But maybe this
Who's
is
hosting?
a part of the answer on your question.
Saritsky.
Where?
It's
at
at
the
the
University
University Club.
Oh, the
Oh,
university.
it coincides with the Russian forum too.
Uh-huh.
Would you like to answer?
No, that's okay.
Mr. Marynovych, we all want to thank you for, I think, this very informative, thoughtful, frank, realistic presentation of yours. We really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us. In the beginning of your presentation, you said, as one of the positive things that have happened in Ukraine in the past decades was the rise of the Western-oriented, desirous of democracy, young generation, and we certainly all agree with it. And we have seen it here. People who are associated in any way with the U.S.-Ukraine Foundation have seen a number of interns every year coming in, and we have seen the change in these young people. And not only the young people, what was the program that you had about exchanging mayors and officials from small
CPP, Community
Yes.
Partnership Project.
Yes, I recall that the first Ukrainian mayors that came from small towns and how they were very, very shy and very afraid to speak. And you could see as with years, they became very confident and sure of themselves. And it was a wonderful thing to see. And that is the hope of Ukraine. And I think you personally, and I think we all believe that, and the Ukrainian Catholic University in Lviv have greatly contributed to the rise of this new phenomena in Ukraine. We are very grateful to you for that. As my wife suggested to me when I was thinking about today's thing, she said, Mr. Marynovych is the moral compass for those people who believe in Ukraine. And I think it's very true. So thank you very, very much.
Sorry for my primitive English.
No, it's wonderful. It's wonderful.
By the way, there will be also U.S.-Ukraine Business Council will be hosting another forum on Monday. One of the best things about accompanying Professor Marynovych is I always find that no matter how many times in a row I hear him, he's always saying something new, so I never get bored. So if even though you heard him today, I guarantee you will hear more interesting commentary that will not sound redundant on Monday if you'd like to come.
Thank you very much.
For me?
Yeah.